Well, South African football is often considered a poor relative to the Barclays Premiership in the UK and some of the big money leagues in Europe. While local competition certainly doesn't attract the same levels of financial investment as some of its more established rivals, the Soweto Derby, that's between the Kaizer Chiefs and Orlando Pirates, is screened across the world to a vast audience. Now, in its cover story this week, Finweek takes a look at these two brands and how local businesses are cashing in on marketing opportunities around these brands. Joining me in studio, as I said, Tandisizwe Mahlutshana, Deputy Editor of Finweek, Jessica Hubbard-Finweek journalist, Tiyani Mabasa-Senior writer for Kickoff magazine, and Tim Sikazi, the Director at QT Sports. Welcome to you all. Good to have you with us. Once again, we're looking at something that, of course, most of the men are very passionate about. And you started off with a quote, Tandisizwe, you wrote about football is a matter of life and death, except more important. That's what at least Bill Shankly, a Scottish football commentator, had to say about this. So, of course, it depends on what perspective you're coming from, but certainly in South Africa, this is the national sport, and these two teams, Kaizer Chiefs and Orlando Pirates, dominate.
That's true, Sam. I think if you look at, you spoke about the soccer derby. If you look at the buzz around when these two teams are going to face off, from television to what is happening in the townships across the whole country, and it has now spilled to other countries all over the world. I think the last match, which was on the 9th of March, was broadcast to more than 80 million homes across the world. I mean, that's a huge number. And the two teams are able to attract about 90,000 fans to one football arena. I mean, that is pretty much unprecedented in the country. And if you look at when one of the teams is facing off with another team, you can expect between 7,000 and maybe 20,000 fans. But when the two face off together, then, you know, it's something else. Mm-hmm. And I think this represents opportunities for many companies. I mean, I think one of the reasons why we looked at looking at the finances of business behind these two sporting brands is the amount of money that is constantly being pumped into these brands, into football, and companies queuing to dig deep into their pockets and take out hundreds of millions of rands.
Yeah, I mean, you bring that up. Let's talk about some of the sponsorship deals that have come to the fore. I mean, Tiyani, talk about the Vodacom 1 billion rand sponsorship. That's of Kaizer Chiefs and the Orlando Pirates, 500 million each. I mean, the amount of that sponsorship, unprecedented in South Africa, and really shows how those two brands have grown, because 1998 they were only raking in 30 million rand, so up to 1 billion rand, a huge jump.
Yeah, it is a huge jump, but I'm not surprised because, like I said, football, belongs to two teams in this country, and that is Kaizer Chiefs and Orlando Pirates. When you grow up in your home, in most cases, you see a Pirates or Kaizer Chiefs picture, and automatically you become one of them. If you look across Europe, for example, you look in England, if you're from Manchester, you support Manchester United or Manchester City. But in this country, the whole country is just divided between the two teams. So obviously, the companies that are interested in investing in football will always, look at those two teams. That's why they have the bigger share of the sponsorships.
Mm-hmm. Just let's talk about, Tim, let's talk about the role of social media. Do you think it's playing an important role in terms of connecting with the audience that sponsors are looking to through their sponsorship of these two soccer teams?
Yeah, most definitely. Social media has become a common trend today in any business. It has become so relevant. Being a corporate lawyer, we lawyers, we're also using social media, in other sectors to attract clientele, or make sure that we at least interact with clientele, or clients are aware of what we're doing. The same applies to football, really. These big clubs command a huge following, and they tweet, they use Facebook quite a lot, and through that they ensure that everyone is aware of their existence, what they're getting up to, and most importantly, from a corporate point of view, of course, that potential sponsors maybe would look at it and say, geez, this particular club has got a following of X number of supporters, thousands. And therefore, they'd want to somehow, find a relationship of some sort that will fit to their business model.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think Tim is making a very good point with regards to social media and how, prospective potential sponsoring companies, because I mean we've seen a trend in South Africa whereby a lot of companies have not yet gotten to grips with their own social media strategies. So it helps to then tap onto something that's already existing and has a huge following to tap onto it. So I think that platform definitely makes a difference.
Just to put a question to both of you, going back to the corporates involved, in your article you mentioned Hollard and Vodacom as sponsorships, big sponsorship deals. Do you think brands in South Africa are taking full advantage of the opportunities that a rivalry between these two teams provides? Are they maximizing what it presents?
Difficult to say, but you know, the focus is largely on them, you know, these two teams. So you could say, yes, they are taking advantage or taking opportunity, you know, that is presented to them. I mean, for example, Hollard, I read in Finweek that they actually rope in about 10,000 more clients every month, you know, so, and they say they'll be with Kaizer Chiefs until death do them part, you know, so.
Well, 10,000 new customers a month just because of that, I'm sure,
yeah,
you know,
that's a loaded statement on its own.
They wouldn't give a number to that investment though.
Yeah.
They won't, but you know, they're raking the cash, you know, as much as they're investing so much money. You know, these two teams are big brands.
But in South Africa, in order to take the game of football, soccer, if you call it further, what do we need to do? Because there seems to be such a concentration on course, the value of Kaizer Chiefs and Orlando Pirates. Should that money not be spread further across more soccer teams, basically, and more tournaments in South Africa? What do you think?
Look, in the ideal world, the answer is definitely yes. But truth be told, you know, there are realities that goes with this whole thing. Chiefs and Pirates, they're the biggest clubs in the African continent, I suppose. If you say for maybe, I think they're on par with the likes of Zamalek or Al Ahly in Egypt. So, you know, corporates, fortunately or unfortunately, they look at that, you know, and as long as those clubs command a huge following across the continent or even to the world, I think they will remain more attractive to corporates, you know, and unfortunately then to other sides in South Africa, you know, they don't command so much following, such that when they play, take for instance, last week we had a Free State Derby between Bloemfontein Celtic and Free State Stars, you know, the attendance was a paltry 5,000 supporters, and it was a sort of a provincial derby, you know, and the same happens when Mamelodi Sundowns plays SuperSport United, you know. So I think now the task is on the relevant clubs to step up their game, you know, they need to aspire.
But you need also funding to do that. You need funding to also attract the right players.
Look, you do need the funding, but again, I think I pulled one club as an example, Sundowns. You know, they are owned by the well-known billionaire Patrice Motsepe, so funding is not an issue. But you've got the same club still not attracting the right number of supporters. You know, Sundowns today they need to be filling their Loftus Stadium with ease. So it's not happening. I think the problem then doesn't necessarily lie on funding alone or lack thereof. I think it is more to do with what the club itself does administratively from a marketing point of view. So if they could get it all right, I believe you know, it will change the face of our game for better.
Yeah, you made a good point in your article that these brands have so much power, but these soccer clubs don't really have enough business savvy. They aren't taking advantage of the marketing opportunities. So while they are doing relatively well in attracting the likes of Vodacom and Hollard, they aren't really maximizing it to the full extent that they could.
Look, I mean, I think what's important is if you look at the smaller clubs, for example, the funding is an issue, but you know, it all has to start on the field. If you're not doing it very good on the field, chances are you're not going to attract that much funding. I think that, you know, the likes of Kaizer Chiefs and Orlando Pirates have over the years evolved to become economic engines. Whilst not obviously discounting what they exist for, which is playing on the green grass and actually scoring goals. But the fact that they have now commercialized the brands means that they're actually moving with the times. And I think before they actually maximize that opportunity a lot more, they still have to learn about how to do it properly. And I think so far their start has been good.
Yeah, I mean, just to bring up also another issue when it comes to this is, in fact, none of the big soccer clubs in South Africa actually own a stadium, and of course they're quite expensive to rent out the stadiums. Orlando Pirates and Kaizer Chiefs, of course, included in that. Do they need to be able to do that? Do you think that it's a funding issue? I mean, what's holding, especially these two key clubs, back from doing that?
Yeah, it's definitely long overdue, but it is a funding issue. Because, I mean, building this area will cost a lot of money, and money that these clubs don't have, you know. But just to go back to his point that he was making now, sometimes I don't think it's a matter of success, you know, because a club like SuperSport United, for example, you know, they won 3 league titles in a row, and they still had 500 supporters at the stadium at the time, you know. So it's quite a complex issue, you know. So for these clubs to get to a stage where they can have their own stadiums and so on to take years, you know. Some of us may not be here when it happens.
Yeah, I mean, what about the international appeal of the two brands and how that's evolved? Because if you look at, for example, the 9th of March Derby, you had 80,000 fans, 90,000 fans almost, but an estimated 100 million viewers. You put that into the context of Obama's latest acceptance speech, 38.3 million viewers. It shows the reach of Kaizer Chiefs and Orlando Pirates on a global scale.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it? It's very exciting and encouraging to all involved in football. You know, globally, these clubs are now really attractive, going abroad. And by the look of it, from where we're sitting, it looks like come 3, 4, 5 years down the line, this derby between Chiefs and Pirates will be rated amongst the best in the world. You know, it's maybe on par or closer to the likes of Real Madrid or AC Milan, Inter Milan.
But do you not need to have, you know, a wider base of kind of, you know, strong superstar soccer teams from to pull from, as opposed to just these two soccer teams to take the game of football forward here?
Yeah, look, like I said earlier, in the ideal world, that's what you need. You know, what's happening to Chiefs and Pirates today really should be a lesson to all other clubs in our game. You know, they should just take a leaf out of the Kaizer Chiefs or Pirates page and try to do what these clubs have been doing right, you know, so as to improve. Otherwise, over the years, it hasn't happened, and by the look of things, it doesn't look like it will happen anytime sooner. But I think the challenge is to those clubs to make sure that they do step up and take their game to the next level.
You also looked into the superstar soccer players in South Africa, and of course you've got Utumeleng Khune, #1 goalkeeper, Bafana, Kaizer Chiefs. He really rates #1 when it comes to sponsorship deals. And you look at kind of the top players in South Africa really owning the lion's share of earnings, and once again, should that money be spread more evenly, and can it be?
Look, I think the World Cup in 2010 certainly helped in terms of profiling you know, individual superstars and actually themselves being profiled and getting all the sponsorships, all the lion's share sponsorships. And then you've got another few players that are, you know, that are really good, therefore, you know, getting all the money from the teams, but really don't have the appeal of the other players. For example, you speak about Utumeleng Khune and Sipho Chabalala. I mean, Utumeleng Khune is still probably the best goalkeeper in South Africa, or maybe in the whole continent. And then you have Sipho Chabalala, who made his name globally for scoring the first ever World Cup 2010 goal. And I mean, just by the virtue of that thing, and I think the discipline, which is always an issue in football and I suppose in any sports in the world, the discipline that they've been able to maintain since the Soccer World Cup has actually meant that they've been able to have these contracts
off
or
what
agreements.
took place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other players who were quite sponsored during the 2010 World Cup, but since the World Cup, you know, they were just not disciplined enough, and therefore all sponsorships were pulled out.
How does it affect the game of soccer that you've got superstars like the ones we're talking about now earning millions, relative to some other players for big clubs that are reported to be only earning around 5,000 rand a month?
Yeah, that has in a big way, you know, but then again, it goes back to the issue of, you know, who do you play for? You know, if you play for Kaizer Chiefs and you appeal to potential sponsors, you know, we can get endorsements and so on and so on. But if you play for a smaller club, you know, then again, you're not going to have anything, you know. So that's how it works in the South African game football. You know, it will always be like that because it's always about, you know, two big clubs. You know, and most of the time when you sign for Kaizer Chiefs, for example, you know, in the past, you know, you used to actually have an opportunity now to get into the national team. Meanwhile, when you played for a smaller club, you know, you couldn't have the opportunity to play for the national team. So things are slowly changing because, I mean, players from smaller teams can be selected to the national team, and hopefully, you know, players from the smaller teams can also get these endorsements.
Could you not argue, though, that the funds are not being spread evenly enough, and that is perhaps a reason for what some have criticized as their lack of depth? The lack of depth and talent of local soccer players, because only a few get those higher salaries and the rest are coming off a really low base.
Look, that is a very contentious issue, to be honest. You know, I've had comments to the effect that a false market has been created in football. You know, it all started with the likes of Motsepe when they came to the game. I think there was a lot written about huge salaries at Sundowns, and of course other clubs had no choice but to follow suit. And it so happened that only the big ones could try to do that. That is Chiefs and Pirates, of course, whilst the other clubs, you know, are left behind. So the unfortunate part to the rest of the teams is that the best talent is attracted. I mean, it can only go and be afforded by these two big teams, you know, and then and
or they go offshore.
Or they go offshore, but you know, in South Africa we don't see that happening often. Again, I think it answers your question as to how has it affected our game, having these superstars earning such a huge amount of money. That's one of the things, is that our players now, you know, they find it hard to go abroad because they are very expensive, our top superstars. A player like Kune, if he were to leave our shores, he really has to leave.
You could afford him.
Yeah, only if I was sponsored for 100 million rand a month.
Wow. Sounds like a juicy sum there. Let's come back to the game of sponsorship and what it means for marketers. Do you think that they're getting value out of this from the marketers that you spoke to? Of course, the likes of Hollard, MTN, Vodacom, even the banks, Absa and Barclays sponsoring the PSL.
Look, I think if we try and put these numbers into context, I mean, you look at 500 million rands. That's how much, you know, banks and insurers have dedicated for Africa expansion. So that's a lot of money that is now being pumped into one single entity. But you know, I think there's a general sense that, you know, things are coming together in terms of realizing return on investment. You know, Tiyani mentioned the example of Hollard. I mean, they were extremely excited, and normally when things go right, you tend to expand. And I asked them if because it's I mean, the agreement with Chiefs has been so successful for them that they're able to write about 10,000 policies a month. You know, will they look to extend to maybe an Orlando Pirates, you know, to get to a more wider audience? And they said no. By the looks of things, we're very happy at Chiefs, and we're willing to die with them, or till death.
Till death do Chiefs and Hollard part. Do you think that the marketing space, or it's becoming saturated with so many brands wanting to attach their names to just two teams, ultimately is what we're looking at right now?
Yeah, because of the numbers, you know. I mean, what Sundowns offers you, for example, is not a lot of numbers, you know. So automatically, you know, you start looking at Kaizer Chiefs and Orlando Pirates. Because as much as Sundowns are regarded as a big team, but that's only on paper, you know. So in reality, they are one of those teams that can only get about 1,000 fans to the stadium. And you look, as a company, you're looking into investing in such a team, you'll think twice about it, you know. There's no way you're going to say, well, let's invest in Sundowns. You know, fortunately for them, they've got Patrice, you know, so that they don't have issues with money. I remember a couple of years ago, MTN wanted to inject about 30 million rand at Sundowns a year, and Patrice said, no, that's not enough. He can afford to do that, but what about the other clubs, you know? So unfortunately, if MTN wants to invest, they'll always look at Chiefs, Pirates, at least Sundowns, but at Sundowns they were not wanted because of that.
And then another issue that has come up with sponsorships is fraud, allegations of who's basically pocketing money from some of the deals. I mean, if you look at the Barclays PSL deal, a lot of controversy around the fact that Irvin Khoza and Kaizer Matang pocketed money from that, 50 million rand each. I mean, is this being cleaned up? Tell us about your thoughts on that.
You know, it was unfortunately one of those issues that was written extensively about in local media. but after a few months, it just disappeared. I don't want to say under the carpet until somebody shows me the carpet. So, but then the reality is that that money, I believe, has been paid to the powers may be. Maybe one or two of them declined, that offer. But again, you have to look at it and say, is it justifiable, to have a few individuals pocketing a good sum of money, from where I'm sitting, it doesn't look like for doing a lot of work,
I mean, if you look at the numbers and you say that they got 50 million rand from this one deal, and you look at some of the soccer players in the country pocketing 5,000 rand a month, I mean, certainly would anger many, and would say that it's corruption, fraud, mismanagement of funding. What's your thoughts on that, Tiyani?
Yeah, well, just like football belongs to Kaizer Chiefs and other parties in this country, also belongs to some certain individuals. And the likes of them, Ivan Khosa, for example, is Pirates chairman, is the PSL chairman. We don't see that happening in other countries. It's actually some sort of conflict of interest, in my view. So unfortunately, football, is controlled by some individuals in this country, and obviously it won't go to the other guys, to come in and have some sort of input in terms of improving our football going forward.